July 8, 2014, Israel launched a devastating military attack on the Gaza Strip. Over the course of 51 days, the Israeli military dropped nearly 20,000 tons of explosives.
Questions, please pass them to the side or turn them in to one of the staff here, and we'll sort through and we'll look at as many as we can. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but we will try to ask a number, and then, of course, we're going to have an opportunity for open comment period. And those who are watching in the auxiliary, if you have questions, you may either want to walk them in here, or perhaps we could go in there and check. Well, someone in there will collect. And also, if you're in the auxiliary section and you want to make a comment, when we invite people to do that, of course, you'll have to come in the room to do that. All right. Let me explain a couple of things about how we're going to proceed, and then we'll jump right in and talk together in the time that we have left. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we've had a change in the panel, and I want to explain that and explain what we're going to do to address that. Two individuals who are advertised to be here, Rabbi Shmuel Hersfeld and Maharat Ruth Afreed from Ohev Shalom Synagogue, were going to speak as part of the panel. And we appreciated their willingness to do that. We've had a real difficulty getting folks from groups opposed to this film to come. We issued invitations to a number of organizations, and their position was they didn't want to come and be on the panel. Their position was to encourage people not to come. We thought that the two individuals from Ohev Shalom were coming, and just yesterday, with one of them, and then again today, we've heard that neither of them are going to come. I regret that. I understand at some level they're thinking, I imagine there have been some pressure in different ways in that regard, but the folks who we had identified to bring the voices as particularly critical of the film are not here. Now, that doesn't mean you won't hear some criticisms from others on the panel or others making comments. But that is the case that we're left with. So what we're going to do is we really do want you to hear some of the criticisms of this film. You've probably seen certainly some in the media. We want you to hear some others. So what we're going to do is in a moment, I'm going to introduce the other two panelists to you, but in a moment, in the time that would have been taken by the Rabbi and Maharat Ruth, we are going to read some statements of criticism of the film, because we want that on the table. We want that as part of the discussion as we go on. So I have a couple I'm going to read, and I'm going to call on another individual who's going to read a short statement and explain that to you. But before we turn to that, I want to introduce the other two panelists. And then we'll hear some statements that we're going to read critical of the film, and then we'll hear what the other two panelists have to say. This is Matthew Mayers here next to me. He is with the organization J Street. J Street describes itself as a pro-Israel, pro-peace organization. And they say on their website that they think vibrant discussion about issues on this relating to the Middle East are good for Israelis and for American Jews. And I assume that's part of why you're here, looking for vibrant discussion, Matthew, and we appreciate you being here. He is the co-chair of J Street in the D.C. area. Our other panelist is Taher Herzala. Taher is with American Muslims for Palestine. He is, I believe, the grassroots advocacy and outreach coordinator. He's been with this group for several years, and we'll be talking from his perspective and on behalf of the organization. He grew up mostly in Southern California. Actually found out talking to him very near where I grew up, we had this interesting moment. He went to University of California, Riverside, which is my hometown. So we had a little Southern California talk when we met, and he now lives in Northern Virginia. So they will be making remarks. We've asked panelists to keep their remarks of just 5 minutes or less. And the way we're going to control that is we have an intern and for the city of Takoma Park named Charlotte here in the front row, who is going to be the timekeeper. And what she's going to do is, for the panel, when they get to 4 minutes, if they're still talking, she's going to hold up a yellow card like that. And you will all know that we're getting near the end, not just the panelists. And then at 5 minutes, she'll hold up another card, and we'll know the time is up. We don't expect people to stop mid-sentence, but we do ask when you see the red card to wrap up your comments. We'll use a similar process with the open comment period in a few minutes. So we'll start with a couple of other things we want to have, some statements we want to share. One came to our attention late this afternoon that we're going to start with. Do we have a microphone in the audience? Brenda, not yet. Perhaps we can just do it up here. A gentleman contacted me saying he had a statement critical of the film, and that it comes from a source that some of you may know of, Ambassador Dennis Ross, who's been very involved in issues in the Middle East. And because of the absence of someone here, a few are on the panel, I told him that he could start with a brief statement that Ambassador Ross has written. So Jonathan, where are you? Yeah, if you could just use this mic here and you can read the statement from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a citizen of Montgomery County who just happened to contact the office of Ambassador Ross. And given his background, and for those of you unfamiliar with Ambassador Ross, because of some of you may be, for more than 12 years he played a leading role in shaping U.S. involvement in the Middle East process and dealing directly with the parties in negotiations. A highly skilled diplomat, Ambassador Ross was U.S. point man on the peace process in both the George H. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations. He served 2 years as Special Assistant to President Obama and National Security Council Senior Director to the Central Region, and a year as Special Advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. He was instrumental in assisting Israelis and Palestinians to reach the 1995 interim agreement. He also successfully brokered the 1997 Hebron Accord, facilitated the 1994 Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, and intensively worked to bring Israel and Syria together. He's authored many books, including The Missing Piece, the inside story of the fight for the Middle East. Here is a statement, and by the way, Ambassador Ross is currently counselor and William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Ambassador Ross has seen this film, and this is what he says about it. Conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the media are not new, any more than anti-Semitism is new, and by definition, the two are linked. One thing about conspiracy theories, they are used to mobilize passions and not to inform. They feed polarization, but not understanding. They always try to demonize, I should say seek, those are his words, they always seek to demonize a group or one side in a conflict. And one thing I know about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it is not a morality play where one side is all right and the other all wrong. When watching this film, and since you've already seen it, Ambassador Ross says, when watching this film, ask yourself, is it about promoting peace or hatred? Is it geared towards ending the conflict or fostering it? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And I want to read a few other of the letters that we have received, because we do, again, want to hold up the concerns and criticism about the film as we continue to discuss it and hear from panelists and then you as we go along. You may have seen in the paper, certain elected officials have expressed concern about this film. A number of members of the Montgomery County Council signed a letter to the mayor and the council of Takoma Park concerns about the film, and here is in part what they said. We felt compelled to express grave concerns with the city of Takoma Park's decision to show the film as part of the We Are Takoma series. While we strongly believe in the value of respectful discussion, this particular film does not promote that. It uses centuries-old anti-Semitic tropes about the Jewish people controlling and manipulating media and government. This hateful and destructive premise of Jewish control and propaganda has been weaponized to persecute Jews and justify the destruction of the Jewish people. At a time when we're already seeing increased polarization and a lack of civil discourse nationwide with anti-Semitism and other bias incidents on the rise, this decision runs the risk of further stoking those flames of division. Another letter was received from State Senator Benjamin Kramer, and he says some similar things, but here's some of what he says in his letter. Occupation of the American Mind is a propaganda film, bake-rolled, produced, choreographed, and narrated by rabid supporters of the movement to boycott the Jews of Israel and to bring about the financial ruin of the Jewish state. Israel's Arab neighbors have fought to destroy it through decades of military aggression and terrorism. Having failed in those efforts, they're now marketing propaganda films like the one you will be hosting in an effort to influence the ignorant to support them in their efforts to demonize Israel. Boycotts of the Jews is certainly nothing new and has been a routine go-to over the centuries for the anti-Semites. Your promotion of this movie will certainly help connect them to their 12th century roots and to ignorant ancestors who believed in blood libel. And one final comment from another location, actually, where this film was shown, similar language I just want to share. And then, of course, you get a sense of some of the concerns being expressed. The Occupation of the American Mind, a film replete with well-worn anti-Semitic canards, which have for centuries been used against Jews and more recently the Jewish state. This type of anti-Jewish propaganda left unchallenged paves the road for anti-Semitic acts. The film unambiguously accuses American Jewish leaders of involvement in a semi-secret conspiracy with the Israeli government to occupy the American mind. The strong inference is that of an international Jewish plot to direct American foreign policy. This theme of nefarious Jewish scheming is an anti-Semitic trope originally birthed in the infamous forgery called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Okay, so you see a similarity in those comments, but it's really, again, important that we look at them, and that needs to be kept in mind, that there are people deeply concerned and feel that way, about this film. So we want to turn to our panel and invite them to make some comments about the film or whatever they would like. I want to start with Matthew Mayers. Matthew, what comment would you have, if you want, about any of these statements and or just in general the film and what you'd like to share with us this evening?
Sure. Thanks, Theo. And I also want to thank all of you for being here, as well as for the staff of Takoma Park for all you've done tonight. I know it was trying and it took a lot of work, so I appreciate that. So Theo mentioned I'm the local chair of J Street, DC Metro. I've been that for most of the last 10 years. We describe ourselves as being pro-Israel and pro-peace. And that means, as I do, that you can love Israel and still disagree with policies of its government. And you can love Israel and still think Palestinians are not evil, but people with their own rights and their own need for a homeland of their own. And we believe that America must continue to pursue the two-state solution, so a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. And a lot of people don't know this. The polling continues to show most Israelis and Palestinians support this solution, but people on both sides also do not think it is going to happen, at least not going to happen anytime soon. And you can see, obviously there's a very fair reason for that skepticism and despair. That's the perspective I come to the film. I come to see the film. The film is obviously an advocacy piece. You might call it a propaganda piece. If you saw the film just said, propaganda is not necessarily a dirty word. It is putting forward the point of view of Palestinian, pro-Palestinian activists. I do not think it's anti-Semitic. If it was, I would not have been here. And as Theo said, or as Susie said, the Takoma Park would not have shown the film if it was. I think we've heard the criticisms. I think it's too bad that that was where people went and instead dealt with legitimate criticisms of this film. And so I guess I'll take on some of them. As I said, it is a one-sided view. There is another Israeli narrative that is not just Hasbara, is not just propaganda. And I think that is, we in J Street see that there are two competing narratives that are both viable, that are both legitimate, and that there is a claim on this land from two people, and that we must find a way to have a solution to that, for people to live in peace and in justice together. That is really what I see it as, but that does not, there is an occupation. It is real and it is brutal. And so the question is, how do we end that occupation? That's going to take a long conversation of hearing both narratives, of hearing from people on both sides. That's not what the film does, and I hope people will take the opportunity to hear from both sides. And I'll make a plug here for our organization has a conference with several thousand people, hundreds of speakers this fall, October 26th to the 29th in Washington, and you'll get to hear from Israelis and Palestinians as well as Americans who work on this issue. Again, I think the reaction from the Jewish community, you're going to hear, we want to hear an acknowledgement of that Israel is a homeland of the Jewish people. This film does not deny that, but we need to recognize the film really paints Israel as a, there's one Israeli view, there's one piece of Israeli actions that have happened, I guess, from 1948 to today, if not before. There's one Israeli who's interviewed, Amira Haas. I think a lot of folks looking at this will say, look, we have to look at some of the other things that have gone on in Israel pre-67, pre-occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, as well as things like the Gaza Accord, the Oslo Accords, and the attempt to come to a peace agreement there, which obviously the failure of those accords has very much decreased the support for the peace movement in Israel, which at one time was really a majority position. I guess I want to end with saying, I do want people to realize that Israel is divided over these issues, just as America is divided with its administration right now. You have an expansionist prime minister who's committed to doing everything he can to stop a two-state solution, but you also have people against that. Unfortunately, right now in the United States, you have a president who has decided to support wholeheartedly the settlement enterprise, from nominating David Friedman, who's an explicit supporter of settlements, to a whole range of other actions, to giving the green light to actions that make getting to a just and peace solution much harder. And that's really a tragedy over the last few years. So one of the things in J Street we really feel is we need American leadership here. We need a very different policy from the one that President Trump is pursuing in the region right now.
Thank you. Tahir?
Thank you. Thank you, Azalea City, for hosting this wonderful film screening today. I want to thank especially the mayor of Takoma Park, Kay Stewart, for her incredible fortitude, perseverance, and strength in maintaining her principled position to screen this film despite the vicious attacks she faced, despite the horrendous attacks that she faced from State Senator Ben Cramer, who equated her with Hitler this morning. This is the kind of vicious response, delirious, incredibly outrageous response that we Palestinians and those of us who support the Palestinian people get anytime we have a public forum to discuss our narrative. See, unlike the city of Takoma Park, I don't regret that those who oppose this film couldn't come. Because imagine Yes, thank you. Imagine we had a film about the effects of climate change, and instead of having a panel full of people discussing how we can deal with the effects of climate change, we decide to invite those who oppose climate change as a concept, who oppose the idea that the climate is changing. This is the outrageous nature of the discussion that we're having when you have a sort of a perceived equivalency between the Palestinian narrative and the Zionist Israeli narrative. The backlash and who it came from. The same organization, primarily the JCRC, which I will name here, that has stood so vehemently against the screening of this film and worked so hard to prevent a real discussion on the impasse between Palestinians and Israelis, is also the same organization that lobbied the Maryland state legislature to pass anti-boycott legislation which would curtail the rights of all of you sitting in this room today. It's the same organization, and they failed to do so, by the way, in the state legislature, thanks to so much of you who worked so hard against that in Annapolis. But despite their failure, they worked to lobby Governor Hogan to issue an executive order to criminalize the boycott of Israel. So much so to the point that one of your own Marylanders, or is it Marylandites? Is it Marylander? Yes. Sued Governor Hogan over this executive order, and we stand with Saqib Ali in that case. This is also the same organization and its affiliates and allies that support federal legislation to criminalize Americans for boycotting Israel, to support federal legislation to equate criticism of the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. All of this, and these are the same groups that went up in arms when Congresswoman Ilhan Omar heroically questioned the Israel lobby's influence on members of Congress, which is common knowledge on Capitol Hill, I might add. At every turn, the opponents of this film screening and their allies have been working diligently to prevent us, the American public, from questioning the US-Israel alliance. And what's ironic about this response to the film and this reaction to the film is it proves exactly the point of the film. That anytime there is a discussion on Palestine from the Palestinian narrative, there has to be this aura of objectivity by including an opposing voice. How ludicrous and ridiculous is that? I do have to say about the film, extremely high quality, amazing analysts and speakers. We're not talking about pro-Palestine activists merely. We're talking about researchers, scholars who have studied the subject for decades and have worked extremely hard to provide the American public with real factual information. But I guess we live in the post-truth era, isn't that right? That no matter what kind of factual information you show, there will be some accusing you of peddling in fake news. And it is these principled Jewish voices, I would say more than half, at least, of the people that were interviewed for this documentary were Jewish and have worked diligently, the principled people who have put themselves on the line, who have gained the ridicule of so many people in their own community by speaking truth to power, and I salute them for their courage and continuing to do so. How much time? I have 1 more minute. All right. Does that mean done? Oh, okay, sorry.
We'll come back. Yes.
You know,
We'll come back to you
sometimes
right
when it's
now.
a yellow light, you keep going.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right.
We don't have cameras to stop you here,
That's
but all right. We want to take some questions have been handed here. There's so many I can't get to all of them, but I've tried to pick a few that seem representative of some of the things. One of the things that I want to ask someone about is that one criticism of the film is that it focuses too much on efforts to manipulate media, and it ignores a lot of other factors that tend to influence U.S. opinion towards Israel. Certain cultural, historic, religious factors. For instance, there was a mention of the religious right, but not very much. And does the film, is it too light on some of the other factors that really tend to, make Americans predisposed to support Israel?
Sure. I think Look, in J Street, we do not, the way we look at the conflict is not through this narrative of the power of the lobby or the manipulation of the media. We do talk about some other things that were touched on the film. The majority of the Jewish community does support a two-state solution. But look, those two issues are very much triggers, and those are tropes, right? There are anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish control of the media or politics, right? Right now, we have supporters, unfortunately, of the president who weaponize that all the time, and often with very violent and tragic consequences. So that's not the way we look at the film. I do think, I'm sorry, that's not the way we look at the conflict. We talk about it through how do we get to a two-state solution? How do we look at these two narratives and find a way that people can live in peace? Yeah, I do think it's more complicated than media manipulation. I think there's a lot of things that are going on to this. I recognize too that it is there are differences between how Europe and the United States looks at Israel and Palestine for a variety of other reasons. So I would say, look, if you're going to deal with this conflict, it requires much more than one film, and we're going to have to keep learning, right?
Tahir, you have a comment on that?
I mean, this film their objective is very clear from the get-go. This film is about media influence. This film is about Israel's propaganda machine. They quote specifically reports and studies that the Israelis have done themselves or institutes that are allied with Israel. I think it's very, very clear what the objective of the film is. They mention nothing about Jewish control of media because that's not the objective of the film. Jews were talking about how Israel controls, how Israeli institutions and Israel lobby tries to manipulate the media. That's very clear. That's common knowledge. So I don't think this is a viable criticism. The other thing I would like to add is something that Matt said that I want to, if you'd allow me to respond to, Theo, is that he mentioned that there's two viable narratives that we can come together and discuss and how we can come to a viable solution. And I want to say something very clearly and unequivocally, that with respect to Matt, that the narrative of the colonizer is not a viable narrative. The narrative of the occupier is not a viable narrative. When we talk about this issue, we need to be very clear about where we stand. Either we stand with justice or we stand with occupation. Either we stand with liberation or we stand with slavery. That's the bottom line for me and for so many people. And that's why I think I would urge all my friends, especially those with J Street and others who want to work for peace and justice, to join us in working for peace and justice by boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning the state of Israel.
Yeah. You have a quick comment, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, we disagree with that, and J Street does not support the BDS movement. We do support civil rights for folks to participate in the boycotts, but we don't think it is the way to get to a solution of this conflict.
There was a question about public opinion and whether you sense that public opinion is changing in the U.S. at this point. There was a little mention of it in the film. If you'd both comment on that, trends you see and whether it's turning in a particular direction. Either of you could go first. And again, keep your comments brief so we can touch on a lot of questions. But
Sure. Yeah. If I recall correctly, there are a series of Pew and Gallup polls that just came out this spring that indicate there is a very positive shift in public opinion, American public opinion on this issue. I don't recall exact numbers, so don't quote me on it. But I could find those resources and share them with as many people as possible. But there is a positive shift in public opinion, and I think it's leading to potentially the policy shift or the I would say the will among politicians to stand up and speak out against Israel's intransigence. And I think this is something that we are seeing. I think even those who are running for office now, especially for executive office, for the first time, as far as I remember, and I have, I'm still very young, but as far as I remember in my short lifetime, this is the first time that I remember seeing a presidential candidate speak about Palestinians as human beings, speak about Palestinians as people who deserve rights. Typically, we see presidential candidates talking about Palestinians as a security threat, as a threat to the safety of Israel. And so this is a positive shift, and I think that's a result of the public opinion shift.
Do you have a quick comment on that, Matt?
Sure. I mean, I agree. I think the discussion is definitely changing, and I would agree with Tahir that you can see it at not just in Congress, but at the presidential level on the Democratic side among the candidates.
There are a couple of questions that ask about the leadership on the Palestinian side, and I want to kind of point to them and then get quick comments from you. The film makes no mention of any failing of the Palestinian leadership. Do you consider that to be fair and accurate? Do you believe that Palestinian leadership bears any responsibility for the suffering of the Palestinian people or the failure to get a peace agreement? And then someone else has a similar question. Why have Palestinians rejected offers of statehood at least 3 different times over the years, and talks a little bit more about that. Much could be said on this, but brief comments on this. Question about looking at the other side in terms of what do you see, and are there failures you'd point to on the Palestinian leadership?
Well, I'll take it. I mean, just very briefly, I think there's been failures of leadership on all 3 sides, right? There's been failures. I would say there have been failures in the leadership of Palestinians, but also failures of leadership in the Israeli government. We very much feel that Prime Minister Netanyahu is taking the country of Israel in the wrong direction. And I think there's been failures of leadership in the American government, too. There have been some that have been presidents have been more committed to trying to get to a just solution. And certainly right now we have someone who is not at all.
At every turn, whenever the Palestinian leadership, so-called Palestinian leadership, however you want to define it, has tried to establish independent institutions, has tried to gain recognition and statehood at the UN, has tried to formally adopt a certain level of sovereignty, Israel has opposed that. And I think it's very important to understand when we think about what's been happening, that there is no opportunity for any Palestinian leadership, whether it's the existing one or future, as long as Israel continues its occupation, there will be a lack of ability to conduct the Palestinian affairs, to establish Palestinian rights and statehood. And this is something that's fundamentally wrong with the way that we discuss this issue.
There's another question about sort of the controversy around this film, and particularly as it relates to discussion on college campuses. I know Tahir, you work on campuses. You probably do also, Matt. I know J Street does in some ways. The question is about intimidation on college campuses. Is that increasing? Say a bit about it, the difficulty of having these discussions similar to this or this whole territory on college campuses, and just some brief experience with that. And is that getting worse, or is it overblown? Maybe there is more freedom of speech than this?
I could say a lot about that because I worked for many years on campuses. Number one, the attacks on students, student organizers and activists working to educate fellow students about Palestine have increased exponentially over the past few years. Not only are we dealing with rowdy and extreme students, Zionist supporters on campus, we're dealing with administrative sanctions. We're dealing with university leadership that is weak, that is not principled, that has refused to acknowledge students' rights, to boycott, to engage in peaceful and nonviolent ways to hold Israel accountable. And on top of that, now we're dealing with organizations that blacklist student organizers and activists, which has led to some students being denied entry into Palestine, into our homeland, have led to some students losing their jobs or being prevented from gaining jobs or applying to law schools, and so, or grad schools in general. And so this is the vicious nature of the pro-Israel lobby on campus, and it has only been getting worse as we see the success of the BDS movement on campuses.
So I cannot speak directly to the situation on campus. I don't do campus organizing right now. I mean, I think I read many of the same papers as you all do, and I know it has gotten, it is a difficult situation. I think there are folks on who are supporters of Israel who say that there's a lot of intimidation there too. What we've tried to do in J Street U and our university chapter is find a place for folks who may not agree with either of the narratives fully, but want to find a way to be able to discuss it, and for a way to to come towards a solution to the problems.
There's a question, we have time just here for a couple more, and then we'll turn to some open comments. There's a question here about the concept of right of return. It was not mentioned so much in the film, but it's a key issue in the discussion of this. Do you believe that Palestinians should get the right of return? What comment would you make on that? Matt, you want to start?
I mean, I think the solutions that have been out there that have been in discussions between the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis with American support would be that the main right of return would be to a independent and viable Palestinian state. There may be some limited right of return for a limited number of people, but in general, the right of return would go to folks who would be being in the state of Palestine.
I think fundamentally, yes, the right of return is a main pillar of the Palestinian cause. I think that whether or not Israel likes it, the Palestinians have a right of return. Whether or not the Israel lobby likes it, the Palestinians have a right to return to their native and indigenous homeland in whatever numbers we please and we like at any time and any juncture. This is not something to be negotiated. This is something that is enshrined within international law, within UN resolutions that were passed decades ago. And so this is not something to be fundamentally altered.
There are a couple of questions about, as we look at where the solutions lie in the future, a question about the two-state solution and whether you both endorse that or how you approach that question. And then a particular question, I think really for you, Tahir, do you believe that Israel has a right to exist as an independent, democratic Jewish state? So if you want to comment on either of those, the two-state solution or that particular, why don't you start with that particular question?
Yeah, I mean, I think Israel has effectively killed the two-state solution by creating new facts on the ground, by continuously colonizing the West Bank and particularly East Jerusalem, as we see this week with the home demolitions that have started in Bab al-Hummus neighborhood, with 100 homes slated to be destroyed. This is what ethnic cleansing looks like, ladies and gentlemen. This is what displacement looks like, dispossession looks like, and Israel is continuing to be engaged in that. And so it doesn't seem like Israel is interested truly in any type of state solution except a one Israel solution, essentially. And therefore, that answers the second question, was does Israel have a right to exist? First of all, it's very interesting that a Palestinian is asked whether or not the colonizer has a right to colonize his homeland. I find that very interesting because it almost, in a way, number one, sometimes is used as a litmus to characterize me in a certain way. But number two, it's interesting because the colonizer sometimes seeks the validation of the colonized in order to justify their presence on that land. And I unequivocally say that states do not have rights to exist, just like the United States does not have a right to exist on native land. States don't have rights. Human beings have rights. Human beings have human rights, and that is what we should be concerned about.
Matt?
Yes, I believe strongly Israel. To say I believe Israel has a right to exist would be to shortchange my commitment to the state of Israel. Where I have relatives and a love for Israel. I think, I don't know what to say beyond that. The film, one of the reasons I thought the film, and I was willing to talk about the film, is the film actually, it's not in the shorter version, but talks about the two-state solution and supports it. Tahir has taken a different position. I guess that is not viable anymore, and that we would have to go for one-state solution, which I don't think is just and I don't think is viable. And so I think we need to recommit ourselves to fighting to have a two-state solution, and American leadership to bring about a Palestinian state next to Israel is what we all need to be doing.
Let me ask one final question. There's several like this, so maybe we can close with this. It touches on what several of you asked. I'll read one, but it's representative of several. I'm a Jew who knows that it's true that AIPAC is a powerful lobby that spends money to influence Congress. How do we talk about this truth without sounding anti-Semitic? And there were a number of questions like that. How can people who are concerned about Israeli policies, talk about them without this label being put on. Ideas about that and that we might think about as we go forward and we all are interested in engaging on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think the best way, you know, there was a comment in the film that there's nothing nefarious about being involved in politics, right? And the best solution for something you disagree with is for you to get involved, right? Is to have more democracy and more involvement. We have, you know, I encourage people to get involved in J Street, but I also know there are other groups with a different perspective that people may want to get involved in, and I think that's the best way that I would answer that question.
I would say that there is real anti-Semitism that exists in America today, and it is not being peddled by those who support Palestinians and Palestinian rights. It is being peddled by the neo-Nazi right wing. They are truly dangerous. They have committed crimes against the Jewish people. They have shot up synagogues. They have vandalized Jewish institutions and cemeteries. This is the real anti-Semitism we should be talking about. And if there was any federal legislation that would be passed about anti-Semitism, it should be focused on these individuals who are threatening the lives of people, not trying to prevent discussion on Israel and Israel's policies.
Okay, thank you, thank you. We want to switch and give the time we have remaining for an opportunity for just several of you to express your views. We will have microphone here and here. And again, I'm going to ask you your comments to keep to 90 seconds. I know that's difficult, but we want to hear several voices. I'm hoping we will hear from some people who are both supportive of the film and critical of it. So I'm going to look for folks who can give us some different perspectives here. So I may not exactly go in order of people who are here, but go ahead and stand and we'll see where we are. Let's start over here. And if you'd say, beg your pardon? Yes, sorry, thank you. We once again will keep time. And the way it will happen is at a minute, you'll get a yellow card held high, so we all know you're at a minute, and then you'll get the red card at 90 seconds. At that point, finish your thought. We're not going to cut you off mid-sentence, but we do want to hear from a lot of folks here with brief statements. So if you'd say your name, and then your comment. If you're with a particular group, okay, but not necessary.
My name is Miko Pellet. I want to thank the city of Takoma and the mayor and the panel for putting this together and for standing up against this, against the opposition. This is not an easy thing to do, and I want to commend everybody who's involved for making this happen. I want to say it seems to me that the criticism and the discussion about this movie has been conflating what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be Zionist. Jews, there have always been Jews that opposed and rejected Zionism, and there still are Jews who oppose and reject Zionism. And so to conflate the two, I think, is very, very dangerous. Zionism is a very particular ideology. It is a racist, settler colonial ideology that says that I, as a Jew, have a right to live in Palestine, which is where Tahir's family is from, at his expense. That is what Zionism is, and Jews have always opposed it, or many Jews have always opposed it and still continue to oppose it. And so what we've seen is we've seen the state of Israel, in this movie, we've seen how the state of Israel is involved heavily and invests heavily in making sure that the American public gets a certain perspective and a certain perspective only, and how they respond. And if you go online, and I spend a lot of time doing this, you will see exactly how the state of Israel does it. There's a Ministry of Strategic Affairs that is involved, that has a huge budget, and is involved primarily in responding to anything that has to do with the fight for justice and freedom in Palestine. So I just want to say it's important to remember that this movie is not talking about Jews controlling the media. It talks about how the Zionists are making an effort to shape American public opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we hold up the red sign, to continue to hold it so we'll know we're at time and we won't forget that. Yes, over here, this gentleman.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Ahmed Dean Ahmed, and I wanted to take my 90 seconds to address what I think is the strongest argument against the film. Most of the arguments were pretty lame, but I think that it is fair to say the film is one-sided. Not that it's anti-Semitic, because it's not in any way against Jews, but it is one-sided against Zionism. I do think that the other side should have, but that's the point of the film, isn't it? To say that there's a side you haven't heard. And I think that the other side should have been given the opportunity to present themselves on the panel, but I know that you tried, and that it's not your fault that they're not here. By the way, Tahir, even if the subject were climate change, I would want to hear the other side. The refusal, I'm sorry. So I do want to quote, address the question of whether one side is always in the right. Of course, one side is never always in the right, and Mr. Ross was correct to say that. But I'll quote my friend, the late economist Murray Rothbard, who wrote an article called War Guilt in the Middle East. He said, never is one side totally in the right and the other totally in the wrong. The problem is that in this case, the one side that is almost totally in the right is thought to be almost totally in the wrong. And the side that is actually almost totally in the wrong is thought to be totally in the right.
Okay, thank you. Yes, on this side, yeah, Benjamin?
Yes, thank you. Theo, thank you to the city and to our panelists. My name is Benjamin Douglas. I'm an organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace DC Metro. Appreciate everyone being here. There was one comment in the press that we turned down an opportunity to be on the panel or have a comment. That's not true. Would have loved to participate, but glad to just have this brief remark. We hope you will join us. There's no litmus test for any type of ideology, but we believe in peace through justice, and that includes applying concrete pressure on the powerful actor that is the State of Israel to support Palestinian rights through consumer boycotts and through changes in this policy. So I think there are criticisms of the film, but the principal takeaway, I hope, is that the situation of the government and the situation of the people of this country, which, as Tahir noted, was also expropriated from indigenous people, is not a neutral one, and so we ourselves cannot be neutral looking at this. We are supporting the occupier, and so if you want to join us to work to challenge the status quo, I hope that you will do so. Thank you.
Okay, this gentleman here.
And now for something almost completely different. My name is Jonathan Levy, and I am proud to say that I am a Zionist. Zionism is, in a sense, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. And I think that's what it needs to be understood as. This piece of propaganda to which we have just been subjected, courtesy of something called We Are Takoma, raised many questions. If I had 45 minutes, perhaps I could ask them all, but time constraints limit me to just one. I want to ask the panelists to acknowledge that, in fact, there's a public relations war against Israel going on, that this war is the latest stage of an attack that began with conventional military invasions, followed by wars of attrition, followed by terrorism, all of which failed, although terrorism continues sporadically, and that the goal of the attackers, including the partisans to whom Takoma Park provided a platform tonight, is to destroy the State of Israel and deny its people their rights to self-determination. That's what this is really about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I want to remind you, just listen deeply, even if there are things that are being said we're not completely supportive of here. There are legitimate different points of view here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Najla Drubi, and I just want to thank Takoma Park again for opening the discussion. It's high time we all opened our minds and tried something different. In that line, I would like to ask those who criticized the movie or who came in and willingly saw it, what was most disturbing about it? Was it the images of the Palestinians being slaughtered, or the fact that you've been duped all these years, or the fear of speaking up after seeing the movie? I sure hope that you can start speaking up freely. And as far as J Street goes, I think the two-state solution should be a decision made by the Palestinians, not by us Americans or any outsiders. As far as the criticism of the movie being anti-Semitic, I think the people who were criticizing are the anti-Semites, not this movie. They are stoking anti-Semitism by pretending that this is the Jews that basically have monopolized the media. This is not what the movie said. They only talked about Israel monopolizing the media. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yes, over here, this young man.
My name is Pritzker. I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I'd just like to say to some of the critics who are saying, oh, well, Hamas has in their charter that they want to, kill all the Jews and they want to destroy Israel and all of this, that in Operation Cast Lead, for every Israeli that was killed, 107 Palestinians were killed. So we need to ask ourselves, who's actually genociding who? Because you're talking about this theoretical genocide, but it's Israel that's actually genociding the Palestinians every day. The Zionists are always calling on Hamas to be nonviolent, but it's actually the IDF that should be called on to be nonviolent. The IDF are the real terrorists. Bombing hospitals is actual terrorism. Imprisoning and torturing children is the actual terrorism happening in occupied Palestine today. And also, I'd just like to say to J Street, in all my years, organizing around Palestine, calling for peace and justice in Palestine, I've never seen a member of J Street condemn or stand along beside me every time the IDF and the Israeli Air Force bombs a hospital, kills Palestinian children, or anything like that.
Thank you. We'll have a chance to... We're going to invite the panelists to make brief comments at the very end so they can respond if they wish to any of the comments as we close. Yes, over here.
Yes, Larry Goldkind.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I have, in a sense, with the movie and some of the speakers, both from the audience and the platform, is that if you're going to talk about this topic, I think the starting point is there a right in any place, in any number of square miles, for a Jewish state in the area? And if the answer is no, then it's an entirely different discussion. If the answer is yes, but there needs to be a Palestinian state and justice for Palestinian states and certainly acknowledgement of horrible suffering, that's a different tack that you take. And I think that Mr. Mayer's comments about, and actually one statement that was read by Dennis Ross, is if you're going to look for a solution, then you need to know what what is an end goal. If the end goal is that Jews in that area of the world are all colonizers, then it goes one way. If there are two narratives, varying degrees of rightness, wrongness, doing good, doing bad, then that's another way, and it's another discussion. But I feel like there's been a lot of euphemisms about the term occupation. Is occupation the post-67, the post-47, or is it the occupation of the sea to the sea by colonizers, as Mr. Hezbollah said, which have no right to anything? And probably if that was answered in people's minds, then there'd be a clearer discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, time for a few more here. We're going to run just slightly past 9 o'clock, but believe me, we're not going to go on and on. But I do want to hear from a few more, and then we'll have some closing comments. Yes, right.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed. I just first wanted to thank Takoma Park for holding this event. It's essential that people do see what is going on in Palestine and see what's happening to the Palestinians. I think it is, though, very shameful that people are allowed to bring in statements from people who didn't even want to be here, condemning a movie they didn't even see. I think that's just horrible, especially when it comes from a state senator who didn't even choose to come here.
Okay, go ahead. Let him finish. Let him finish.
I think I get like an extra 30 seconds.
No, that's all right.
But I would say that, when it comes to Palestine, we see the numbers always go one way. We're seeing Palestinians losing land. We're seeing Palestinians being killed. I think instead of arguing hypotheticals about countries and who belongs where, we should definitely be discussing how our country is giving money to help aid the destruction and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. J Street calls themselves pro-peace, but they stand against the most peaceful way to fight the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, the BDS movement. If J Street is pro-peace, why are they against BDS?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So, right, I think we need to, I think we're now getting into the content of what a community really needs to talk about. Issue number one, we are living at a time where if you criticize the state of Israel, your actions are criminalized. You're accused of the worst things. There's legislation, there are actions designed to shut down criticism of the government and what it's doing to Palestinians in Gaza. We have to push back up against that and talk about and expose that for what it is, which is a violation of free speech and another way of clouding the truth about what's happening. In American society, people in Gaza aren't seen as victims. They're not seen as human. That is kept from people. And I think that this documentary is a very good start in opening up a discussion in this country about the horrible conditions and the things that the Israeli government is doing. And I have to say, there are people who have a stake in the American electorate remaining pro-Israel no matter what's going on in the world. And those folks are the Israeli government, the Israeli state, American arms dealers, American weapons companies, and the fact of the matter is they don't want us to be honest about the fact that we spend billions of dollars. Our tax money kills children in Gaza. It blows up hospitals in Gaza. It destroys schools and communities. It's devastated generations of people, Palestinian people. And that's, we don't do anything about it. That's money, by the way, that we could use for, I don't know, healthcare, climate change, all kinds of things, decades about
Thank
this.
you.
And,
Thank you.
I just think that that's what we need to hone in on, is that we need to stop U.S. aid to
Thank
Israel.
you.
It's the ultimate, and we need to defend the right to criticize Israel.
Thank you very much. A couple more, and again, let's continue. You're doing a great job of listening respectfully. We've heard some different views here. Let's hear 2 or 3 more, and then we're going to have to come to a close here. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Saul Golubko. I am a proud Jewish Zionist. And when I planned to come here to watch the movie and listen to the discussion, I didn't know if I would say anything. And if I did, I thought I'd probably address something intellectually. But after watching the movie, after listening to Tahir, after going back to what was said at the beginning of the event, that this would be a community of learning, that this should be safe space, I have to share with everyone, I am frightened to my core by what I have seen in the movie and what I have now experienced as being part of this event. And it's not, I'm not frightened on the Palestinian-Israel presentation of the issues, nor really what the polemic of Tahir, the stridency of his polemic said. I am frightened to the core because there is no recognition that in ascribing nefarious motives, control of Congress, control of the media, control of our mind, as the title of this movie suggests, that's what the movie is about. It's about certain groups, a certain group of people taking over Congress, the media, and the minds. And to do that, that is an ascription of hate and bigotry, and that frightens me to the core. I am frightened for myself. I am frightened of the good people of Takoma Park. I am frightened for my children.
Thank you.
That's what leads to future Kristallnacht.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, here and then maybe one more, and we're going to have to close, ma'am.
Yeah, I keep trying to organize this while I'm listening, and it doesn't work at all. I'm Kay Elephant from Silver Spring, who really ought to live in Takoma Park, as I've always said. I belong here. I've worked as a Jew with Jewish groups that I can't count anymore for 40 years for a Palestinian state, because when I wised up in 1979, I got it. And I've driven generals and Knesset members and stood at the Israeli embassy alone. I started a vigil against expulsion of Africans from Israel about a year ago. I set up a vigil and mostly stood alone in the cold. I am committed to this. Zionism to me is, as my Muslim brothers and sisters face east 5 times a day, we face east 3 times a day. I'm proud to be a Zionist. I don't like the sullying of that word and the generalizations tonight. And I thought when anyone says Israel doesn't want peace, and Bibi, most of us can't stand him, we all want peace, I'm sorry. Generalizing that so many people in Israel, so many American Jews want a 2-state solution work. I could have gone to movies all these 40 years instead of meetings forever. So I just...
Yeah, finish your comment.
The generalization, using these words against Israel, and I didn't plan to be here defensive, but assuming the global thoughts about Israel is like assuming that every American, that America supports these children, little children in cages.
Good.
It's a generalization. I'm getting queasy
Thank
about
you.
the way people talk tonight.
Thank you. No, you made your point clear. Thank you. This gentleman, maybe we have time for 2 more. I'm sorry I'm not going to get to everybody, but we've heard from a lot of voices, and I really appreciate you listening respectfully. You want more? No more. We're about to close. That's what I said. All right.
Thank you very much. My name is
Okay.
Bob Wittman. I'm a Zionist. I'm a member of Congregation Bethel in Bethesda, Montgomery County. I just want to say that I agree with the people in this audience who feel that the Jewish community, the JCRC, should have been represented here. That's why I'm here.
Good.
I'm here to try to create dialogue with people over an issue where people are basically 180 degrees apart. And where there's propaganda, I would add, on both sides. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. Based on what is going on here tonight, the laughter, the snarky remarks, my parents would be rolling in their graves. They would never have imagined that a community could react this way to a Jewish cause. And I don't care if it's Zionism. Zionism is my liberation movement. So I have a question for Mr. Herzala. Do you believe that Jews have a right to have their own state where they are the majority, can determine their destiny, and receive Jews who are persecuted all over the world, whether it's from the right, as you correctly pointed out? Many of the views expressed here are really consonant with David Duke, by the way, just as a reminder.
Yeah. Okay.
Or from the left, as we've seen in Great Britain,
Okay.
where the Labour Party is falling apart because of anti-Semitism.
Thanks for your expression of
So
concern.
let me answer that in 4 words. Not at my expense.
Okay. All right. I think what we're going to do is I think we're going to close the comments at this point. I want to thank everybody who commented, and I want to basically it's past the time. It's past the time we said we would close, and we really need to move on. There's a time for informal conversation. I'm sorry, we need to close. That's one of my jobs here, is to make sure we don't stay way beyond what we said. And we've heard from, if you just have your attention for 1 minute here as we close. I'm going to do that. But I'm just thanking people. No, ma'am. Sorry. We're finished for now. So we're going to ask the panel to make a final comment. And then we will have an opportunity, if you want to stay and visit with the panel, talk among yourselves. There are some refreshments. But I asked the panelists to make brief comments of closing comments, and then I'll say a word of thanks, and we'll close our time. Tahir, you want to start? Matt? Either one.
I have 3 comments. Number 1 is, if the truth frightens you, it says more about you than it does about the truth. That's number 1. Number 2 is, why would the most prolific linguist in the world, Noam Chomsky, who also happens to be Jewish, participate in this film He's also the son of Holocaust survivors. Why would he participate in this film if he thought that it peddled in anti-Semitism and tropes about Jewish people? That is just ludicrous. That is just absolutely absurd. Number 3, and this is my final comment. This is not about how you feel about Zionism. This is about how Zionism manifests itself on the ground today. And that is the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of the Palestinian people.
Okay. Okay, Matt, the final comments you want to make?
Sure. I found some of the comments tonight very disturbing. I think the generalization about the Zionists made the film look very reasonable by comparison. The film explicitly talks about a two-state solution, while I hear several of the people here opposing Zionism, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. I am proud to be a Zionist. I'm proud that my daughter will be a Hebrew-speaking Zionist. I am happy and I'm proud to work together with you all to end the occupation. I am not proud, and I will not work, and I will work very much against you if your goal is to end the state of Israel or to defeat Zionism. I think there is common ground. I think there are two sides that can work together to end the occupation and have a viable Palestinian state alongside a secure and safe state of Israel, and that is what I hope we all do going forward.
Thank you both, and thank you all for being here, your attention and your enthusiasm and your comments. I just want to urge you to take with you the wide variety of heartfelt comments that were shared, and to show as much empathy and respect as you can for all of the very different views that have been expressed. So we appreciate you being here. We hope this has been a helpful learning experience, and hopefully the beginning of ongoing conversation about these very important and tough issues. So again, thank you for being here, and good night.